Greetings, students. I hope this video finds you doing well, wherever you now find you. Now remember last time I talked about East Asian philosophy as having a kind of unfamiliarity about it, rooted in its acceptance of the mythic mode of thought as valid for cognition of reality. Not because less is trying to be said, but because they're wanting to point to more than you can put into words. And a key point arises that though the truth can't be captured in words, yet the words give us the truth through pointing at it. The words are the finger that is pointing at the moon, and you don't want to mistake the finger for the moon. Remember I said not to laugh, because it's the spirit of our age to take the finger for the moon, the map for the territory. Folks stubbornly continuing to view things a certain way according to their theory, when the reality is so much larger. And you feel like you're talking to a crazy person when you talk to someone possessed with a theory. Now, the texts we're reading, I said, purport not to give us a theory, but to point at the truth. The Tao is not a theory, but the truth. Brahman is not presented as a theory, but the truth. And the clear light of the void, Buddha mind, is not presented as a theory, but as a truth. And language can't tell you the truth, but it's pointing at it. To tell the truth is to point, and the words are like the finger. And if you don't see what it's pointing at, just keep looking. And you never believe the words precisely because they are pointing at the truth. And you never understand the truth because you're coming to know it. In fact, as long as you understand it, you can't know it at all. Consider this passage from the Kena Upanishad in our readings, which makes that very point. What cannot be spoken with words, but that whereby words are spoken, know that alone to be Brahman, the spirit, and not what people here adore. What cannot be thought with the mind, but that whereby the mind can think. What cannot be seen with the eye, but that whereby the eye can see. What cannot be heard with the ear, but that whereby the ear can hear. What cannot be indrawn with breath, but that whereby breath is indrawn. Know that alone to be Brahman, the spirit, and not what people here adore. I also talked about how you read a text, whether Eastern or Western, but it's particularly true of texts from other cultures, where we have all kinds of presuppositions and biases built into how we look at things that we need to take account of. I said that you need to be both inside and outside the text. You need to familiarize the text with you, try to imagine your way into it and see what it's saying, while at the same time respecting the text, being outside of it, letting it stay its own unfamiliar self that is so very different. I also talked about a magical, mystical method for understanding these texts, which is that you read them 3 times. That first you read for the whole of it to get a sense of it, you sort of blow through it. Then you read for the transitions, how the parts connect with each other. And thirdly, you read for the way of thinking. And I said that number 3 is seen in the words and phrases, the actual twists and turns of thought that you take into yourself and make a part of yourself. You don't fancy it, but imagine it. You remake the meaning of the text for yourself as a reader. A very practical matter of making the language and images in argument familiar to yourself through repetition in thought and imagination, while at the same time letting the text be itself, and not to fancy it to be whatever you want it to be. Not to reduce the text to your horizons, to what you want it to be, but to become what it wants you to be, to really try to understand it. Now, in the culture these texts are a part of, it's traditional to have an invocation, a sort of wish for thought and understanding that you offer before you begin to study the Upanishads. So I'd like to honor that tradition. And here's that invocation. Om, may Brahman protect us. May Brahman bestow on us the fruit of knowledge. May we obtain the energy to acquire knowledge. May what we study reveal the truth. May we cherish no ill feelings toward each other. Om, peace, peace, peace. Om, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Now, it seems to me that in the Upanishads, we have a sort of time out of mind ancient philosophy. Some of the very oldest, tracks and traces of thought about what is real and how to live and the kind of wisdom that gives you. If you remember how I talked about philosophy last time, right? We want knowledge of what is real and knowledge of how to live so that we can lead a good life, right? Remember I said that philosophy begins in the wonder and terror of the gap. When you experience something that what your culture has taught you can't really explain, and you're sort of thrown into this experience and filled with wonder or terror, and you want knowledge. You want knowledge of how to live. You want knowledge of what's real so you know how to live. Right? And in this experience, right, we can think about how philosophy arises. We start out in custom and culture, just believing what we've been taught because we're told it as little children and we're helpless and at the mercy of everyone, of our parents first and our culture around us and the schools and everything. And then we have that experience of wonder and terror, and we begin to develop some self-knowledge about the reality. We begin to think about it for ourselves. And out of that experience can drop tracks or traces of our thought that we might speak or write down, right? And we can call these acts of speculation, right? Where we remember this experience we had and try to think about it and try to put it into words. And these speculations then are just so many fingers pointing at the moon. When we try to put into words what we've experienced, the experience that threw into question everything we'd been taught, and we begin to speculate, we're pointing at that experience we had. And the root word for speculation comes from speculum, which means mirror, right? A speculation is a kind of mirroring. The world is mirrored in a certain way in your words and thought, and the vision or system of thought becomes a mirror that you view yourself in the world in. Right? And first, we want to try to understand the mirror when we approach one, right? Like we're approaching the Upanishads. We want to understand that mirror of the world, of reality. We want to read it. We want to study it. We want to empathize with it. We want to practice thinking in the way it thinks. And second, we then want to ask, how does it fit into my mirror or my self-knowledge? How does it line up with what I've experienced in the world? And in the Indian people's experience, right, what did they first see in their mirror, in their speculum? Well, like all intelligent beings, they saw the fact of suffering. Right? Seems to be self-evident if you look around, right? That the world is full of suffering in very many ways. Now, traditionally, all the sort of sufferings we find in being human seem to be summed up in the fact that we're going to die, right? Death could be thought to symbolize the limits of being human and to epitomize the fact of apparent human fragility and suffering, right? And in the Upanishads, and in particular in the Katha Upanishad, we find Nachiketas in a dialogue with the Lord of Death himself. And the Lord of Death, it turns out, has treated Nachiketas badly, and so he offers him a boon or a wish. Right? And here we see Nachiketas as something of a philosopher. He says, when a man dies, this doubt arises. Some say he is, and some say he is not. Teach me the truth. And Death replies, even the gods had this doubt in times of old, for mysterious is the law of life and death. Ask for another boon. Release me from this. And Nachiketas says, this doubt indeed arose even to the gods, and you say, O Death, that it is difficult to understand. But no greater teacher than you can explain it. And there's no other boon so great as this. Teach me the truth of death, because of what use is anything else without that? In fact, listen to that whole passage. I'm going to read it to you now. So, while listening to the lectures, you should always have on hand your text, either in person with a book or on a Kindle or something you pull up on the screen, right? And we're using this Maskara translation of the Upanishads, and I'll often be reading from it to you. If we're in class, I could see you, of course, and I'd have you take your books out and flip to the page. I might even have you read the passages. But sadly, we're in a global pandemic. Talk about the fact of suffering in the mirror of speculation. So anyway, I'm on page 57, about 3 paragraphs down, and death is speaking again. Take horses and gold and cattle and elephants. Choose sons and grandsons that shall live 100 years. Have vast expanses of land, and live as many years as you desire. Or choose another gift that you think equal to this, and enjoy it with wealth and long life. Be a ruler of this vast earth. I will grant you all your desires. But ask me not, Nachiketas, the secrets of death. And Nachiketas asks again, because he's a philosopher. All these pleasures passed away, all end of all. They weaken the powers of life. And indeed, how short is all life? Keep your horses and dancing and singing. Humans cannot be satisfied with wealth. Shall we enjoy wealth with death in sight? Shall we live while you are in power? I can only ask for the boon I've asked. When a mortal here on earth has felt his own immortality, could he wish for a life of pleasures, for the lust of deceitful beauty? Solve then the doubt as to the great beyond. Grant me the gift that unveils the mystery. This is the only gift Nachiketas can ask for. All real philosophy focuses on the question of mortality, on the fact that we're impermanent, that we're going to die. And so Socrates in the ancient West said philosophy is to practice dying like a craft, which means to practice living like a craft in the awareness of the fact that you're going to die. And all of this sort of focuses the mind and makes you think about what's most important. And so when Nachiketas is faced with the Lord of Death, he asks a question, expressing the philosophical attitude, because a philosopher would question Almighty God or self, or the Lord of Death. So in the mirror of speculation, these ancient thinkers saw the fact of human suffering, that we grow sick, that we experience pain, that everything passes away, with all of it summed up in the fact that we're going to die. Now, the mirror of thought we're considering first arose in what is called the Vedic age. There was a people called the Dravidians who farmed in the Indus Valley, and they were overrun by an invading group known as the Aryans, who between 1700 and 1500 took over. And Hindu philosophy in its roots is primarily Aryan with Dravidian roots. The Dravidians, for example, apparently practice yoga. We have ancient seals archaeologists have found with folks in yoga postures and so on. Now, after 1500, philosophical teachings, orally transmitted, eventually formed a collection called the Vedas. And the entire Vedas, in fact, is made up of religious works as well as works from the speculative vision of the seers, the philosophers. Now, and in their mirror of speculation, they focus on suffering and death and the self-knowledge that it gives. And the Sanskrit word closest to philosophy that makes sense to me is darshana, right? Darshana, which is sort of philosophy as speculative vision. Darshana is a Sanskrit word that means vision in the sense of what is seen, of viewing. So if I'm standing up on a top of a hill looking out over a valley, you could say I have a darshana, or a view of that valley, right? So darshana refers to both the activity of having a view and the outlook that the viewpoint gives you once achieved. So to be a philosopher is to have a vision or an outlook on reality. And when it is seen, you follow it on a quest for self-knowledge and moksha, or liberation. And so the philosophers are called seers. Seers, right? They see. They have a vision. And such a person, a thinker, is questioning and investigating the conditions of suffering and the nature of human life in the world, trying to find what is most real about this fact of human suffering and how we should live in the light of it. Until you find the answer, right, in that gap, that is the thinker's darshana, their outlook, their vision, or their mirror, to use my term for it, their mirror for reality. And in history, we find the terror of the gap, though we also find wonder too, right? But in the Upanishads, we see them thinking about this terror. And if you think about it, history is preeminently a place of terror. War, earthquakes, tidal waves, plagues. Need I mention COVID-19, right? With death above all a symbol of it, which throughout history gives human beings a sense of the pathos of life and gave rise in the Vedic culture to a certain darshana which addressed certain questions. And the questions are questions of meaning, of purpose, of identity, and the possibility of liberation. Given the inherent condition of human suffering, does life have a meaning? What is the purpose of my life? Who am I? What is my real identity? And is liberation from suffering possible? Hinduism and Buddhism both share this. They both arose in India, after all. In both mirrors, the activity of philosophy arose from a very basic dissatisfaction with the human condition, resulting in a philosophy based on self-knowledge that leads to a way of life in order to find liberation or freedom, called moksha. Okay? And the philosophies that develop then are very practical. There's a quest for liberation through discovery of who I really am, of what a human being really is. A liberation through self-knowledge. So, the Vedas were called Shruti, which means heard, and Smriti, remembered, because as they were originally presented, it was from a teacher to a student, orally presented, and you only had it in your memory, and it wasn't written down, right? The seers would commit their darshanas to memory and pass them down orally through their students, and it only became written down in later ages. And so it's also called Smriti, or remembered. But first of all, a practical teaching handed down from teacher to student, which emphasizes the importance given to actual experience in Indian philosophy. If the aim is not just to know things, in the sense of giving out knowledge in terms of theories or descriptions, or theories, but to impart wisdom to transform life and give self-knowledge, then the relation between teacher and student becomes very profound. The teacher is called a guru, and the student is called a chela. And a guru is a teacher who has found a truth that they live out, and a chela is one who promises to both listen to and practice the words of their teacher. Okay? So, what the teacher, as one seeking to impart wisdom to transform life, hopes to achieve through education, involves then a sort of turning around, a change at the core of the pupil's existence, the rediscovery of the true self, and students hoping to achieve this and giving their life to it are called the chela. And in this way, these Eastern thinkers remind me most of all of Plato and Socrates, who also thought you had to become a certain sort of person to know the truth, and that the truth just wasn't a theory, but a way that you lived, which is true for many ancient Western philosophers. And that you could only do this, Plato thought, and Socrates, in dialogue with others. So there are many commonalities between the ancient West and the ancient East in this way. Now, each Veda, right, contained several parts. They involved aspects of ritual religion with hymns and sacrifices and rituals to mark rites of passage such as birth, marriage, and death. But the last part of the Vedas, right, that concluded it, were called the Upanishads. As appearing at the end of the Vedas, they're also known as the Vedanta, which means at the end of the Vedas. And literally, Upanishad means sitting down near, and refers to the oral transmission between guru and chela. The Upanishads involved a move beyond ritual religion, as seen in the first parts of the Vedas, into philosophy. At the core is the idea of listening to someone who's already experienced these things you're experiencing and can guide you toward the truth. Here, from the Katha Upanishad, we see the idea of the guru and his chela emphasized. Not many hear of them, and of those not many reach him. Wonderful is he who can teach about him, and wise is he who can be taught. Wonderful is he who knows him when taught. He cannot be taught by one who has not reached him, and he cannot be reached by much thinking. The way to him is through a teacher, a guru, who has seen him. He is higher than the highest thoughts, in truth above all thought. Excuse me. This sacred knowledge is not attained by reasoning, but it can be given by a true teacher. As your purpose is steady, you have found him. May I find another pupil like you. And the Upanishads are really quite scathing toward religion if it's viewed as a final end. And here we see philosophy as a move beyond ritual religion. It says in the Mundaka Upanishad, imagining religious ritual and gifts of charity as the final good, the unwise see not the path supreme. Right? It makes me think a similar attitude you can find in many religions. For example, in Christian philosophy, it's thought that just giving money, like say you pay for a stained glass window, like you might see in a church, and they'll have somebody's name contributed by or donated by X, Y, or Z, Mr. Smith. And the point would be that's not going to get you anywhere. That's not going to get you close to the truth, right? Imagining religious ritual and gifts of charity as the final good. Instead, it says you want to go to a teacher who has experienced the reality, right? In fact, listen to a passage from the Mundaka Upanishad. I'm going to read it to you. But unsafe are the boats of sacrifice to go to the farthest shore. Unsafe are the 18 books where the lower actions are explained. This is quite a radical statement. They're talking about the previous books in the Vedas, the ones who explained all the religious rituals that could be performed and how to do them in the right way. And it would be as if, say, a Catholic said, hey, unsafe is going to Mass to save you. Or to a Baptist, unsafe is going to church and praying a prayer to take Jesus into your heart to save you. or it'd be as if a Jewish person said, unsafe is the Sabbath to really get you close to God, right? And so they say here, the unwise who praise them as the highest end go to old age and death again. I mean, they're reborn over and over again. Abiding in the midst of ignorance, but thinking themselves wise and learned, fools aimlessly go hither and thither, like blind led by the blind. And by the way, I'm on page 76, if you want to flip there in your book with me. I'm on page 76. I'll give you a second to get there if you want. Because if we're in class, again, I'd have you pull out your book and everybody would flip to page 76. Or actually, I'm on page 77 now. Right? Imagining religious ritual and gifts of charity as the final good, the unwise see not the path supreme. Indeed, they have in high heaven the reward of their pious actions, but thence they fall and come to earth, or even down to lower regions, right? Because the truth they're talking about is beyond the sort of illusion of being in a heaven, right? But those who in purity and faith live in the solitude of the forest, right? The sages of the Upanishads were called the forest seers. They'd go off into the forest and live by themselves and meditate, and then students would go find them, and Upanishads sit down by them and learn about their teachings, right? Beholding the worlds of creation, let the lover of God attain renunciation. What is above creation cannot be attained by action, and his longing for divine wisdom, let him go with reverence to a teacher, a guru, in whom live the sacred words, and in whose soul has the peace of Brahman. Let him go to someone who has achieved cognition of reality and learn how to do that too. Now, this stirring of philosophy out of ritual religion is seen in one of the early Vedic hymns, which is called the Hymn of Creation, or the Nasadakya Sukta. Let's take a look at it. The Hymn of Creation. There was neither non-existence nor existence then. There was neither the realm of space nor the sky which is beyond. What stirred? Where? In whose protection? Was there water, bottomlessly deep? Look at how it seeks to address all of creation, both what exists and what doesn't exist. And it's full of questions, right? What stirred? Where? In whose protection? How did all that work? There was neither death nor immortality then. There was no distinguishing sign of night nor of day. The one breathed windless by its own impulse. Other than that, there was nothing beyond. Darkness was hidden by darkness in the beginning, with no distinguishing sign. All this was water, the life force that was covered with emptiness. The one arose through the power of heat. Desire came upon the one in the beginning. That was the first seed of mind. Poets, seeking in their heart with wisdom, found the bond of existence and non-existence. Their cord extended across. Was there below? Was there above? There were seed placers, there were powers, there were impulses beneath, they were giving forth from above. They're being driven to use imagery, and yet the imagery is pointing, right? It's pointing. It's pointing at something more. Who really knows? Who will hear proclaim it? Whence was it produced? Whence is this creation? The gods came afterward with the creation of this universe. Who then knows whence it has arisen? Whence this creation has arisen? Perhaps it formed itself, or perhaps it did not. The one who looks down on it in the highest heaven, only he knows. Or perhaps even he does not know. Maybe even God doesn't know, right? I mean, this is really a philosopher peeking out at us through it, right? Look at the skepticism. Who really knows? Who can say it? How is it produced? How did it come about? Maybe God knows, and maybe even God doesn't, right? This is a philosopher seeking knowledge and liberation through enlightenment. In this kind of philosophy, enlightenment is always through self-discovery. Consider another passage from the Katha Upanishad. Concealed in the heart of all beings is the Atman, the spirit, the true self, smaller than the smallest atom, greater than the vast spaces. The man who surrenders his human will leaves sorrows behind and beholds the glory of the Atman by the grace of the Creator. Resting, he wanders afar. Sleeping, he goes everywhere. Who else but myself can know the God of joy and of sorrows? When the wise realize the omnipresent Spirit, who rests invisible in the visible, impermanent in the impermanent, then they go beyond sorrow. So Indian philosophy, in the texts we're studying, center around self-knowledge, which has to involve all that you are. It can't be just a theoretical task, but it has to be a way of life, a type of radical questioning involved in the task of self-knowledge that changes you. And the questions are radical because they involve your essence, who you really are. And the process of questioning is not theoretical, but is a way of being. It's not a search for truth as a theory, but a search for a life of truth. In this way of thinking, Knowledge of the physical world achieved through your ordinary mind and senses does not give a very realistic view of the world. You know the realistic people, don't you? The ones who will tell you to just face the facts about life. Will tell you to get a life and not waste your time thinking about philosophy or religion or being idealistic because the real world is all hard and everything and you need to face the facts. Get a job, earn some money, be tough or whatever, right? But the question is, what really are the facts? How do you get a life, after all? You know, people will say, you need to get a life. Right? Well, what's a life? Right? To these thinkers, if you rest on what you see around us here, you're being unrealistic because you remain content with the movements of a vast universal illusion which causes a sort of dreamy self-forgetfulness, which ignorance, avidya, literally not seeing, keeps going. And naive and unaware of who you really are, your passions and ignorance carry you around and around in an illusion on the wheel of life, the circle of one damn thing after another that most people mistakenly call reality. So who do you trust, and what do you trust, if you can't trust knowledge of the physical world and the everyday round of existence in your culture? Seriously, what is the real world, and what is the realistic view, and what am I not seeing? According to Indian thought, one thing you're not seeing is that you're caught up in what they call samsara. You're born, you grow up, you go to school, you get a job. 9 to 5, 9 to 5, 9 to 5. Get married, have children. 9 to 5, 9 to 5, 9 to 5. Get sick, get well, eat, drink, make love. 9 to 5, 9 to 5, 9 to 5. Grow old, die, be born. Grow up, go to school. 9 to 5, 9 to 5, 9 to 5. You're born, grow up, go to school, get a job. 9 to 5, 9 to 5, 9 to 5. Get married, have children. 9 to 5. Get sick, get well, eat, drink, make love. 9 to 5. Grow old, die, be born. Grow up, go to school. 9 to 5. And it goes on forever. Right? Now, whether it literally goes on forever or not, it sure seems like it's going on forever. Who can I trust in the middle of all this confusion? Well, as we've learned, the philosophers of the Upanishads thought everyday religion is a sort of trap, right? That won't deliver you any real knowledge, right? And so we can't look to them. We can't look to religion. We have to look for something else, right? In fact, what you need to do is find a seer with a darshana, someone who's already been through it, and by their way of life shows that they've experienced reality. And you sit down near them and listen to find a way to achieve liberation from samsara in trying to live out their teachings. And when we look in the written traces of these oral teachings, we find them saying the same key things over and over again. If you pay attention, they say, you'll experience the Atman. Now, Atman's root word just means breath. You know, breathing out, the breath without which we can't live. And by a sort of meaning extension or metaphor, it comes to stand for the essence or spirit, our true nature, our soul, our real self, which is divine, eternal, and unchanging. And then there's Brahman, whose root meaning is to grow. And it means that which is ever growing and always nurturing growth, the principle of reality of the whole universe around us, which stands for the absolute reality or universal soul. But though Tattvamasi, you, the Atman, are that Brahman, our way of perceiving this identity is shrouded in ignorance or avidya, not seeing. We're literally not seeing reality. And so we're lost in Maya, a state of illusion. Look, I need to go up to the board and erase a word. And so we are lost in Maya, a state of illusion in which we confuse appearance for reality. We experience our ignorance as Maya, and so are unenlightened as to our true self. And we remain in samsara, the unending cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. 9 to 5, 9 to 5, 9 to 5. So for these philosophers, it is bondage to limited ways of experiencing the true self that is at the root of our suffering. And while on the wheel of samsara we go through countless transmigrations, reincarnations of the soul or self or Atman, ignorant of our true identity, there we stay until moksha, ultimate self-realization or enlightenment, when we are liberated from our partial experiences of reality and realize the identity of Atman and Brahman. Now, in modern culture, religion, philosophy, psychology, medicine, exercise, diet, the sciences, all of these are viewed as separate disciplines and areas. And so we have departments of this or that and so forth. A department of biology, a department of religion, a department of philosophy, and so on. Now, Indian thinkers acknowledge the distinctions, but claim an interdependence, because reality cannot be really understood cut up into little bits like that. Because all logical conceptual analysis, argument, and experimentation are done in terms of the way of life that leads to self-knowledge and liberation. So many schools of Indian thought, for example, who disagree in the mirror of theoretical knowledge, so they are strictly speaking logically incompatible, such as whether ultimate reality is ultimately dualistic or monistic. But while they are logically incompatible, they are existentially compatible and are unified through the search for deliverance through self-knowledge based upon a way of life that involves all that you are, that embodies radical questioning that changes you, your life, in the process of the questioning. Your very life becomes the question in the wonder and terror of the speculative vision. Thank you for your kind attention.